welcome back. I hope everyone is safe and warm at this time. So, if you don't know, at the time I'm recording this, over the past week, the South has just been lambasted by severe winter weather. And I mean even more severe than what Tennessee normally considers severe winter weather. I'm from Alaska originally, and I'm looking at this going, damn. So this has put a halt to a lot of things. So the good news is I spent a good deal of the sequester time watching Abbott and Costello movies. The bad news is I now have a backlog of films that I need to review so I can get caught up before I go and view any more. I originally wanted to do this review specifically at night, you know, with the light on me, because this is one that I almost considered doing for This Is Halloween reviews, because this film is one of my usual Halloween rotations. But whether it's dip at night, the melting stuff freezes over, it becomes, so it's like it's either do it now and sacrifice the ambiance, or wait longer and have these things pile up and pile up and pile up, and there are movies coming out I actually want to. So it's like, let's just do it. So here we are, we're back, and I'm really happy to be back talking about this one, because this film is not just one of my favorite Abbott and Costello movies. This movie is one of my favorite movies, period. But when I do my top 20 movies of all time, the number 3 slot is shared by 3 Abbott and Costello movies, because I can't choose between them. And this is one of those films. So this is one of my favorite movies of all time. It is just, so I'm very excited to talk about it. So first, before we do that, let's go back in time and talk a little history before we talk about the movie itself. So the original working title for this film was Oh, Charlie, and this is the film that Abbott and Costello started making right after Buck Privates. But again, as we discussed, the box office for Buck Privates came back. It was huge. Universal lost out on a lot of that money. They wanted to make it back. They wanted to capitalize. So they postponed this film. They put it on hold. And I forget, there are varying reports about how far along they were in filming. But I believe most of this one was done. But they said, stop, we're going to put a pin in this one, and let's get you guys into another service picture right away. And that, of course, became In the Navy, and The Navy became another big hit. And so they finished that, and they went back to work on this film, which would eventually be called Hold That Ghost. A far better title, even though they do say Oh, Charlie a lot in this. One of the reshoots that they did for this picture was adding the Andrews sisters in. The Andrews sisters were originally not in this film, but again, after being such big hits in Buck Privates and then having the larger part in the Navy, the two groups had kind of become synonymous. I'm sorry for the bumpy ride here as I go through. A lot of the parking lots are still iced over. But because the two groups had become so synonymous, they quickly said, film some songs and just stick them in there. So the girls feel very tacked on in this one, but that's because they are. But still, their presence is still wonderful. It still adds some wonderful music to this one. And this is the last, I believe this is the last time Bud Abbott and Lou Costello and the Andrews sisters would team up in one of their movies. Which is a shame, because again, when I think of Abbott and Costello movies, I think of the Andrews sisters. And what we are going to find going forward is that a lot of the music talent they bring in and along the song styles that they do are very Andrews sisters-esque. So that style of music is going to be synonymous with the Abbott and Costello movies for the rest of their time. But let's talk about this movie. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of this one. So before I do anything else, what's the story here? Well, in this film, Abbott and Costello play 2 gas station attendants who, by happenstance, get into a car with a known mobster just as the cops are chasing him down. And the mobster is killed, and his last will and testament, in typical Scooby-Doo haunted house type scenario, the will specifies that whoever was with the mobster at the last moment of his life would get everything that he had. So, of course, Bud and Lou were with him, so they inherit everything, and the only thing they really get is this old tavern off of the main highway. So they and a group of unsuspecting accomplices all pile into a bus, and they head out to the place. They get abandoned there. So now Bud and Lou and their 3 guests are stuck in this dark, spooky house. There are gangsters running around the house. There's secret passages. There's a ghost, which is like some guy in a sheet. You can really tell, and they don't try to hide it. But the gangsters are trying to find their money. You know, it's typical Scooby-Doo stuff. I mean, this is a Scooby-Doo movie. This is a better Scooby-Doo movie than any of the Scooby-Doo movies have actually been. So, where do you start talking about the brilliance of this movie? This is, again, not only just my favorite Abbott and Costello movie, or one of my favorite Abbott and Costello movies, but it just seems like in this film, they did everything right, and they finally got the formula down. Now, they're not going to recreate that formula again for a while, but it feels like in this one, they finally understood Abbott and Costello can be the leads of their own movie. You don't need a subplot, which is basically another movie crammed into their film to make it watchable. Bud and Lou can handle it. So, in this film, Abbott and Costello are the focal points. Now, they still have their supporting cast, and they still have kind of the guy-girl romance, but in this instance, the guy-girls are, again, they're the subplot. They're just kind of the extra that's added, but they're mainly there to add more to the boys and give them someone else to play off of. This is the best, in my opinion, probably the best supporting cast that Bud and Lou ever had, made up of Richard Carlson as a well-meaning but kind of oblivious doctor, Evelyn Ackerson as your typical, you know, blonde bombshell. She's a pretty girl. That's kind of her personality trait in this one. Pretty sassy, you know, that kind of thing. And the great Joan Davis as Camille Brewster, a radio actress whose only credits were being scream sound effects in horror programs like things like Suspense. So you have this motley crew. Again, I say Scooby-Doo, but that's exactly what it is. Richard Carlson is Freddy. Evelyn Ackerson is Daphne. Joan Davis is Velma, and Bud and Lou are Shaggy and Scooby. I mean, it is the Scooby-Doo roster, and that's probably where stuff like Scooby-Doo got those personality types. And again, what's great is that these characters are there to hold up Bud and Lou and just give them other people to play off of. They're not trying to move the plot while Bud and Lou do something completely unrelated. There actually is no subplot in this one. It's all this one story. And another great thing about this, and this is something that they're going to do later on, is they discovered 2 things about Lou Costello. Number one is that obviously Bud Abbott is the best straight man of all time, and he and Bud are the focus. But they learned that giving him a female counterpart, a love interest for lack of better terms, presents new dynamics and new chemistry and new jokes that you can play off of. Giving him Joan Davis as she is kind of a love interest in this, but she's more of kind of a female Lou Costello. But this gives him someone else to play off of. And what you're going to find is, as we go forward, a lot of these movies are now going to give Lou some kind of female presence to play off of. This can sometimes be a femme fatale, you know, kind of like in a film noir film that he's going to chase after and is obviously way out of his league, but it's funny to see this little fat man hitting on this, you know, gorgeous, statuesque woman. Or they're going to be some variation of some kind of goofy character that complements his own goofiness. And Joan Davis was the first and one of the best. She was really good in this. One of the highlights of this movie is a dance number that she and Lou Costello do during a dinner scene. And it is laugh out loud funny. It is so good. And what you also understand, and this is something you don't quite, that gets underscored, especially with actors like Lou Costello, who were short and round. But how good of athletes some of these comedians were. Lou Costello was an athlete. He was a boxer and a basketball player. You know? And Joan Davis had some chops. During this dance scene, there's a scene where he's standing up. She's on the floor. He takes her hand, and from a seated position, she leaps into the air and into his arms. It's damn impressive. And I'm looking all the time to see, was that wires? No, that was her doing it. You also got, again, I mentioned this in the Navy review, but damn, I love this dance scene. But the two of them are falling and slamming into the floor so much, and sometimes just makes you go, oh, God. But they were going full force. It is a really, really good scene. The second thing that they realized with this one, and again, this is going to be a gold mine later down the line, is that there are few things funnier in this world than Lou Costello when he is scared. Now, comedians in a spooky situation has been a staple for as long as comedians and comedy movies have been around. Every comedy team has done some variation of the haunted house. The Three Stooges did it multiple times. Because it's funny to see these, hapless characters in spooky situations, especially when you consider that spooky situations are normally situations that are supposed to be taken seriously. So that's, again, where the comedy comes in. But nobody, in my humble opinion, and not just my humble opinion, did it better than Lou Costello. And I think that, again, goes back to that childlike personality that he had, the character that he established, who was so innocent. So putting him in those scenes, you felt like a kid being afraid of the dark. And pair that up with Bud Abbott, who is the adult telling you there's nothing there, stop being a fool, but there's something scary going on, and the adult in the room just doesn't see it. It's a universal appeal, and few people do this better than Lou Costello. And this movie is just him being terrified almost from start to finish. And it is phenomenal. No less an authority than Whoopi Goldberg once said that Lou Costello scared was blah funny. And I agree. It is, watching him react to these things is just amazing. This is also one of the films, I think, that incorporated the boys' vaudeville routines in a much more natural way than a lot of their previous films. They only do really one of their classic bits, and that's the moving candle bit, or as I call it, Oh Chuck, or Oh Charlie, or Oh Chick, or there's variations. Where Lou is alone and a candle moves on its own, and he keeps calling Bud back in to see the candle, and of course Bud looks at it, doesn't move. That's the only real classic bit of theirs that they do in this one, and the rest is just almost all new material of them just reacting to things. I also got to say that this one is very interesting in the direction. A lot of B-movie films, which is essentially what the Abbott and Costello movies were. I mean, that's what they were signed to do, was a bunch of B pictures. The direction in them is very standard, because it had to be. If you were shooting these things fast, you couldn't take time for fancy setups and, camera tricks. It was point, shoot, move on to the next thing. That was just necessity. But the direction in this one is also very subtle, and there's some neat things going on. And several times during this film, the camera shifts so it's at like a Dutch angle. If you watch the old Batman TV show. You know what I'm talking about, whenever they're in the villain's headquarters and the camera is kind of at that tilt. So there's a couple of times in this when the camera is tilted in that Dutch angle, which puts everything a little off kilter, and it also makes things like hallways seem wider and longer than they actually are. So there's some really smart direction going on in this film. And again, little things that don't take a lot of time, but add some atmosphere and add some ambiance to this one. I guess if I had to say if there's anything wrong with the film, or not necessarily wrong, is that I guess they couldn't really decide if the ghost was real or not, because for most of it, it's clearly a gangster with a sheet over his head. You can see the gangster under the sheet, but they never explain like how the candles actually moved. You know, so that is such a minor tiffle in this. There's really nothing wrong with this one. It is an almost flawless picture. It's just that damn good. I guess the only thing I can say that makes me a little bit mad about this one in retrospect is the advertisements. Now, again, I love this movie, and this movie is, like I say, damn near perfect. But as I was doing research for this and finding, the images that I use for the title cards and whatnot, the posters for all of this feature the Andrews sisters very prominently. The posters make it look like it's Abbott and Costello and the Andrews sisters in the haunted house, and not the not Richard Carlson, Joan Davis, and Evelyn Ackerson. And that just makes me mad because, one, I think this is the best ensemble that the boys have ever had. So I would have liked them to have gotten a little bit of the attention, but also because now I'm mad that I will never get to see a movie with Abbott and Costello and the Andrews sisters in the haunted house. That would have been great. That would have been so good to put them and the Andrews sisters in the haunted house. That would have been so awesome. And I'm mad that now I will never get to see that. It's not that I want that instead of the movie I have, because I love the movie I have. But it's like, you're looking at it going, I'll never get to see that. Just like, you want to know another one of my sad ones? I will never get to see Lou Costello play Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing. When I read Much Ado About Nothing, I see Lou Costello as Dogberry and Bud Abbott as Vergus. That is what I see. And I am so mad that I will never... First of all, that nobody else in Hollywood thought that would be awesome, because that would have been awesome. And secondly, that I will never get to see that. It's something I imagine very vividly in my mind. I wish I had more to nitpick about this movie, but even watching it back, and admittingly there's a lot of nostalgia attached, I'm looking at it with my critical eye and going, there's just not a lot to criticize here. The film just works. The script worked, the characters worked, the balance worked, the comedy is top shelf. It's a virtually perfect film. Is it logical? No, it's a comedy. But the logic works well enough to let you go along for the ride. So I cannot recommend this film enough if you've never seen an Abbott and Costello movie, and I highly recommend it during the October season when you're looking for spooky movies. This one maybe not be a horror movie in the traditional sense, but it is one of the best haunted house comedies ever. And again, a heavy influence on later things like Scooby-Doo. So if you have never seen an Abbott and Costello movie, then this is one I would definitely recommend starting with. I wish I had a little bit more to say other than this movie's outstanding. And the critics thought so too. This was another huge hit for Abbott and Costello, and really cemented their place as the #1 box office draw of 1941. This movie released August 6th of that year. And I'm kind of glad we got to talk about this one, because unfortunately, the next two films that we're going to talk about, the quality starts to dip a little bit. So I'm glad we had like this kind of high point, because the next two are going to start sloping down just a touch. So we'll talk about how the boys follow this one up and what branch of the service they decide to cause havoc in next time. So until then, as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.